Okay, so today we are going to be discussing the standard agreement for the sale of real estate. This is our offer form, but if the seller signs, it becomes a legal contract. So it's very important to know what is in this legal contract. First off, on page 1, we have the parties outlined. So the buyer name and then any seller name there. We then have the property information, the school district, etc. And I fill all that out, of course. And then we have that I'm your buyer agent and I represent you. Buyer agent with designated agency, as in only I represent you, not everyone at my brokerage is representing you. In this case, I used another eXp agent so that you can see it would be a dual agent situation, but it's just speak under the brokerage. The broker is a dual, but I'm not acting as a dual agent because myself and this colleague, we're not sharing clients. We don't work each other's clients, etc. So still designated agency. You're not being represented by the listing agent. So you have your protection in place. All right, page 2, by this agreement, this is going to be today's date. So for when we're signing. So if I send it out to you at 11:50 p.m. and you don't get to it until the next morning, then you're signing and it's still fine. It's just going to have that date for whenever I wrote it. The purchase price is going to be here. And then we have the deposits. So if you're doing a home inspection, sometimes we split it up and have 2 different deposits, with the first amount being a little bit less, like $1,500 to $5,000, and then the second deposit being the rest. Your deposit amount is typically 3 to 5% of the purchase price. In a competitive situation, you can put more down as your deposit. Your deposit is held in a non-interest bearing escrow account by the listing agent or in a non-interest bearing escrow account by the title company. Then it's applied to your closing. So you'll bring, whatever, in this case, whatever your closing cost plus down payment minus $25,000 in this scenario. We then say if it's being held at the title company versus the listing office. If there's any seller assist that we're asking for, that would go here as in a dollar amount. So you can ask for $1,000 or you could ask for 3% of the purchase price. So either way, and we would use that there. And just keep in mind, if we're in negotiations, this is where, sometimes it's a little better to use like a percentage versus a flat dollar amount in case like the purchase price number changes, and then you might need a little bit more than a flat rate for the dollar amount. Settlement date. This is the day that the property conveys. When do you want to close? Typical closings are going to be 30 days out. Sometimes they're less if they're cash. If you're a cash buyer, you can close as soon as 2 weeks. We typically recommend to stay around 2.5 to 3 weeks though, for a little give. And then if you're an FHA buyer or a VA buyer, you might want to stick closer to 45 days. Conventional, you're good to go at 30, and that's going to be the standard unless the seller is asking for more time. And then if you're being competitive and you are paying the seller side of the transfer tax, we would put that here. Right here. And then down here, time is of the essence. This is really important. Pennsylvania is a time is of the essence state. Time is of the essence state. So we need an expiration date for our contract, because remember, if the seller signed this, it's a legally binding contract. So if we're submitting on Friday and all offers are being reviewed on Monday, then we would probably put Monday's date. But if we're giving a seller offer and we're like 50,000 cash over, we can maybe say like, no, you tell us like in the next 24 hours and move that deadline up. Zoning, it's going to be residential. If you're buying a multifamily, we'll go into that at that time. Fixtures and personal property. This is really important to know whenever we're looking at homes. If you take the house and you turn it upside down and you give it a shake, what's still attached? The washer and dryer, they fell off along with the fridge in the state of Pennsylvania. The oven, the range, the dishwasher, they are going to stay. Smoke detectors, things like that. The outlets, they're all part of the house. So it's important to know, and the trees, of course. Obviously, all these things are in the contract because of issues in the past. That's how the contract grows and develops. So you can tell that there were some major fights in the past over these items. You can, if there's something strange or we're not sure if it's a fixture or not, we can put it here. Like, for instance, some of the islands that are on wheels, if it's one from Wayfair, or, it's like a bought one, we can make sure that it's excluded by putting it here if you don't want it. We try to stay away from putting too many things under inclusion. If you're doing a separate purchase, for personal items in the house, we would do a bill of sale, just because it messes up your appraisal if you're doing financing. If you're a cash buyer, we can kind of throw some things in there and say like the grill or whatever the seller's leaving behind. But typically we'll put in no monetary value. The seller's not guaranteeing it's going to be in a working condition when it's on here for an appliance like that. Okay. Buyer financing. If you're doing financing, you have 7 days to complete your mortgage application once the seller signs. And down here, if you're FHA or VA, this box we fill out, we just have to put the purchase price in there saying that it needs to appraise for that. And also that HUD, if you're using an FHA loan, you need to read for your protection, get a home inspection. They encourage you to get your home inspected. And of course, that's on your own dime. Even if you pulled out of the contract under an elected home inspection contingency, you are not getting reimbursed for the money you spent on the home inspection, which can be about $500 to $1,000 depending on the square footage. Okay, so we're either electing or we're waiving the mortgage contingency. And then if we're elected, we have a mortgage commitment date. This is a letter that the lender sends to the listing agent, and it'll say what's left for you to do in order to have your mortgage. So typically it'll be like, if we're closing in December and it's only October right now, it'll say something like, we need your November statements on it. Obviously it's October, they're not going to be ready for another month. If we're waiting to hear back on the appraisal, then that would be on there as a contingency as well from the lender. What they don't want to see is you still haven't gotten your gift letter signed from your parents. You haven't submitted statements that are from last month, or you don't have something major handed into the lender. This contract states that you are moving forward in good faith. So you need to be doing your part. You need to be responding to the lender. Otherwise, you can be in big trouble. Then we have the loan amount. If you're doing 20% down or 3.5% down, whatever it is, it's going to be based right here, the full loan amount. And then what type of loan, who the lender is. This is why you need to know who your lender is prior to making an offer. And you're locked in with your lender at this point. And then you have your interest rate, your minimum, and your maximum. And that's to protect you if the market changes. If interest rates swung up to 12%, you can't afford that monthly payment because that's like a couple hundred more, then you'll be able to get out of the contract. You won't be held to it. Okay, so then we have, if there is something that changes in your financial situation, don't ignore us. Just give me a call immediately. Let's work through it together. Typically, I find that people who are communicative on that, they have a fair outcome from getting out of the contract. If you quit your job, you will probably lose your deposit money. If you lost your job because you were laid off, then that's a different story, and you might be able to get out based on this section 9 here. Then we need to put in what kind of water is it. It's Most of the time in our area, we're going to be public water, public sewer. If you're some of my clients that go out a little bit further or in New Jersey, we're dealing with septic or well water often, and we'll need to check those. Historic preservation, this would be we would know for typically, you should know, the listing agent should know that it's a historic preserved house, and we would have some information there on that. And then if there's any land use restrictions, we would know when we're looking at the house if it falls under one of these. But for the majority of sales, we're not dealing with that. Then we also have our Internet of Things. Just know people have devices in their homes. They are listening. They're not supposed to record, but they do record. So just be very careful with those devices around, especially when we're seeing houses. Waiver of contingencies. If you're waiving them, then it's really difficult to have your deposit refunded to you on the grounds of a home inspection or something that comes up, because you just don't have the contingency elected. Buyer's due diligence and / inspections. So here we have where you're going to elect or you're going to waive the inspection. The first one is home and property inspection. Typically here we can even do like a mold test. The inspectors that I typically recommend, they'll be able to do one on site if they suspect something, and they'll ask you, of course, first and tell you how much it's going to cost. This one also covers swimming pool inspections in case those need to be done. Remember, the home inspector's not going into the wall. They're not opening up the floors. They're not going in the ceiling. That would be very invasive, clearly, and that's not what they're doing. It's a visual inspection. Then we have the wood infestation. This is checking for carpenter bees damage, termite damage, or powder beetles. And then we have deeds, restrictions, and zoning. So if you're using this for a daycare, if you're using it for an in-law suite, and you only want the property if you can have a certain use of it, we're going to elect that. Most of the time, this is waived. Water service, if the property has well water, you're likely going to do a water service test on it. The radon one, that's radon is the second leading cause of lung cancer, and so it can be really important in our area as pockets of this radioactive gas can kind of move underneath our houses. So if you did a radon test 10 years ago, it might be time to do one now, see if any pockets leaked. And there's a mitigation system. The mitigation system typically costs from $1,300 to $1,800, and it's a bunch of PVC with a fan. But it's something so simple that can affect your health. So you can do a radon test. We need 48 hours for the test in the house to really measure the radon levels in the property. On-lot sewage, you would do this if you have a septic system, and then they would test that, make sure everything's good, because a new septic system can cost about 40 grand. So if you don't have 40 grand and you're not ready to put in that new septic system, we got to do a test. Property and flood insurance. Flood insurance, especially now that we're having so many issues nationwide with flood insurance being dropped on so many homes, and carriers are dropping it, in particular in California and Florida. But that can also, if you have a second home there, it can also affect your insurance here, people are finding. So if the house is in a flood zone, first of all, we look it up and we see if it's in a flood zone, because then you'll need flood insurance. And if you are an FHA buyer, you need government-backed flood insurance, which can be more expensive than a conventional loan, which can typically use a private flood insurer. As for property insurance, You can have it elected if for some reason, maybe the seller on the disclosure said that they have previous claims on the property, and that could drive up. Some insurance carriers will drive up the price if there are previous claims on the property, but oftentimes lenders kind of move those flaws with the person versus the house, keeping it with the house. The next one is property boundaries. If you only like the house, but you need to do a fence, maybe you have pets or safety for children, if it's closer to a busy road and you only want the house, if you can have the land surveyed, perhaps it's a big parcel, you would elect this. But most people are not doing this because it's kind of a pricey test, and surveyors are booked out several weeks in advance. We then have our lead-based paint hazards contingency. Any house built before 1978 may have lead-based paint in the home. We'll still see it on windowsills, windows, porches, exterior door frames. That's pretty common to have it there. And the best way to deal with it is encapsulation, which just simply means painting over it. It's easy enough to identify lead-based paint. It looks like an alligator skin. So when it's kind of peeling and cracking, that's the main identifier of it. To do an elected lead-based paint test, it's a bit pricey. But if it's something that's really important to you, if you know someone who had lead paint damage, because it can damage mostly children and how they're developing, it's a very sad thing because the lead-based paint chips taste sweet. And so children tend to be drawn to it and they might eat it and like it. And it causes neural damage. So if you are, most of the time, like houses have been painted and it's been encapsulated, or some of the wood frame has been replaced where it has been like, they have a new porch, they have new this, that, or it's been already stripped and repainted with modern paint from the wood base. So this is something that we'll talk about on an individual basis per the house, but most people do not elect this. And let's see, most of the time people elect Homewood and Radon if they're doing inspections. I know a lot of people, they're not doing inspections now because they're staying competitive. But remember, all of this is out of your pocket. You do not get reimbursed. Even if there's something about the house that you didn't, that kind of makes you want to pull out because you're not comfortable with that information or fixing that problem, then you don't get reimbursed for the inspection money. You have a certain amount of time to perform the inspections. So you can see I have 5 days here because if you're trying to be competitive and keep inspections in, it's very tough. But in a slower market, we did 10 days, and that's to kind of go in there with the inspector. You want to be present for your home inspection, and then you get that done. If you have the inspection closer to the beginning of the contract timeframe, that's much better. Because on day 10, we also have the reply due. If we're asking for repairs, if we're saying it's good to move forward, and we're saying we're pulling out because of structural foundation issues, then, or what if we need just to have a structural engineer come out? We need that time frame. So you want to get your inspections done ASAP. So as soon as you go under contract, I'll typically ask you like what your schedule looks like this week. When can we get out there to do the inspection? If you're buying your first house, you want to be there for your inspection. If you're more experienced with houses and, you can consider not being there, but I obviously think you should still be there. You learn a lot about how your house operates. Okay. So then we have a proposal, and we send that proposal over saying like, we're asking for these repairs, we're asking for this seller assist, we're okay with everything, we're moving forward, or we want to kind of get out of this contract. If you're getting out of the contract based on the an elected home inspection contingency, and you didn't like the home inspection, your deposit will be returned. And the seller can either accept it, they can reject your proposal, they can counter. And then you have a little negotiation period. We have a couple days to do that and come to terms. Okay. Title surveys and costs. Within 7 days, I'll order title for you and work with them in the background. You might receive something asking for, from Qualia, from NNJ Abstract, asking for your Social Security numbers. This is to run the child support background check. And that's because in Pennsylvania, if you have any child support back owed, it's got to be settled before you convey property. All right, and then we're kind of on to the oil, gas, mineral rights. We're not in the middle of Pennsylvania. We're not in Pennsylvania, so we don't really have to worry about that. The municipal requirements, the seller is going to work on that side. If they don't have them, it's a difficult township or borough, such as, I'll call some out right now. If it's like Jenkintown or Norristown, Norristown's probably one of the worst in Montgomery County with their use and occupancy certification, because they require, there's a chimney, they need a chimney cert. If there's, they need the sewer lateral, they need so many things done, electric, and it's expensive. It's not only expensive, some of the repairs they call out can be expensive. So if the seller doesn't have the money for that, they can come to the buyer and they can say like, look, like we can terminate this contract, or I need like $500 to get this done. Typically, if that's the case, it's going to be advertised as such, and you'll see buyers responsible for any inspections, any use and occupancy, and you'll see that in the description of the property, or it'll be in the agent notes, and I'll point that out to you because it can be very uncomfortable to spend money on a house to do repairs on a house that you don't own. All right, so if the house is in a condominium community or an HOA, we would check one of these boxes, and then the seller, they need to order the resale documents, and we need time to review the bylaws and the rules and regulations and make sure that you're comfortable with that, because maybe the seller was grandfathered in and they used to allow pets and now they don't. I've never seen that happen in our area. But that's pretty much what we're looking for in the rules and regulations. Is there something that you can't live with? If you're going into one of those and you were like, well, I wanted to paint my door purple and it's saying I can't, that's a little ridiculous. I think we all knew in the association you can't paint your door purple when they're all slate gray or whatever color the association chose 30 years ago. And then the resale packet, it's also going to tell you how much for the capital contribution fee is due, and it'll verify the monthly amount due, and if there's any assessments on the, for a new roof, etc. Taxes, they're going to be prorated, of course. Maintenance and risk of loss, this is saying that the seller needs to maintain the house in the same condition that it is in already. Like when we go to see the house, the seller is saying they're maintaining it at that level. And it's going to be conveyed in broom swept condition. So it's not going to be squeaky clean, but it'll be broom swept. Broom swept is a lovely, lovely term that has so many legal implications, but typically we know what we're looking for. Let's see. If you are not a U.S. citizen, you need to point that out to me so that we can make sure that we're all good with FERPTA. All right. And then the other thing is you're not going to the listing agent and discussing anything with them. You're not going to the seller and discussing anything with them. we're at arm's length for this contract. This is in your best interest because it's amazing. Something can go south pretty quick. So just make sure that all the communication goes through me. You might feel silly and be like, oh, I should just talk to the seller about this. Like if they can leave the lawnmower or whatever. No, just go through me. It makes it a lot easier because people have different emotions going through this process. And that's a big part of why to use an agent. Default, termination, and return of deposits. There's a bunch in here, but ultimately, like if you have a contingency, we talked about the home inspection contingency. That's the most common to get out of while under contract. But ultimately, if you sign a contract, you're moving forward in good faith. If you don't move forward in good faith, your plans change or whatever, the seller has a right to your deposit money. But if we ask for it, if you're able to get it back without going into a dispute with the seller, it would come back at 30 days. That's when your deposit money would come back. This is a really important check box here. Seller is limited to retaining those sums paid by buyer, including deposit monies as liquidated damages. This is limiting the seller. So if you walked away at the last minute from the sale, well, that's quite rude. But things happen. I understand. And if you're walking away last minute, we're all at the table and, something happens. You're walking away from your deposit money at that point. And you may owe other parties money as well. So the title company may ask you to reimburse them. My brokerage may ask you to reimburse them. The lender can ask you to reimburse them for the work they did. So you try not to get it to that point. If you're getting out earlier on and there's a real reason, just whenever you have a doubt, just call me. That's what I'm here for. We'll talk about it. We'll see what the best path forward is for you. You're agreeing to go into mediation if there is a dispute between buyer and seller. Okay. So then if we had any special addendums, it would be here, such as the sale and settlement of other property, etc. And then you would also receive an estimated closing cost sheet from me. The lender will work one up for you as well, and that'll tends to be a little bit more accurate because they are more in tune with what the fees are for their side. You'll also receive the consumer notice, and we're going to go over that next, along with the deposit money notice and the other supporting documents. Okay. The consumer notice just outlines the different types of agency relationships with consumers. If we don't have a buyer agency contract signed, I technically don't owe you my fiduciary duties. So I don't need to keep anything in confidence. So it's in your best interest to have your buyer agency contract signed. Seller agent, they represent the seller. Buyer agent represents the buyer. Dual agency is when one agent, like if I was representing seller and buyer in the same transaction, that makes me a dual agent. It's not very fair to do it that way. Typically, I represent one of the parties, even in a private transaction, and I'll represent either just the buyer or just the seller, and I'll do the paperwork for the other side as well. Designated agent, that's what I would typically be for you, which is just represent you in a transaction. A licensee may serve as a transaction licensee. We're not really dealing with that. If I represent you, I represent you. And you have all my fiduciary duties. Okay, so I've got to deal honestly and in good faith with you and to the general public. So if I have a listing, I can't go around saying, oh, multiple offers received when I have nothing in hand. That would not be honest. It would not be in good faith. All right. So the next bit, we're going to talk about the buyer agency contract. So this is what gives those fiduciary duties to you. So typically it'll be a 6-month contract, a year contract, no longer than a year. And this is just saying, most houses that are in the MLS, they already offer a commission. For dealing with an off-market one, we'll talk about that at that point, or for sale by owner, and we'll talk about that at that point, because there are ways to kind of work it into the offer and have the seller pay the commission. All right. So, confidentiality. This contract creates that confidentiality. I'm not going to be telling the listing side anything that would be detrimental to your offer, unless I have explicit advice or explicit directions from you to share whatever that information is. Okay. And then deposit money, typically the listing brokerage will hold on to deposit money. If I'm holding it to transfer it, I'm not going to go off and put it in a different account or whatever. It's going to be held with the listing broker or the title company, whichever is decided on. Civil Rights Act, it's illegal to judge, to kind of refuse to sell, show, rent properties, loan money, etc., because of someone's race, color, religion, their sex, and if they have a disability, their age, country of national origin, if they're using a guide animal, there's no room for that. And that goes for buyers to the seller and seller to the buyer. There's just no room for that. Okay. Buyer inspections. It's sold in its present condition. It's not going to magically become a better house at closing. You're advised to do an inspection at your own expense, for your own information. And then that information would need to be shared with the seller. All right. Recordings on the property. We're not supposed to intentionally be recording people, but we all have our listening devices. There's the Google, there's the Alexa, don't talk to me. She's right over there. But, just be cognizant, try not to say anything that would be, first of all, you don't need to be rude during showings. You don't need to do any of that. You can be excited about a house. I think if anything, like if my house was up on the market and I saw buyers walk through on the video and they were so excited about it, and I'm like trying to hopefully not having video, but or I heard them talk about it in an excited way, like they love my style, whatever it is. I think I kind of appreciate that. But try not to put things down in the house. And it's usually pretty obvious if they have listening devices, but now they even look like a little USB plug-in these days. So just be very careful and cognizant that that's around. All right. And let's go on to the deposit money notice. This would be if the listing broker is going to be holding deposit money. The BFI, you would have to fill this in, answer these questions, like, are you going to occupy the premise? Are you going through a divorce, etc.? Assets, you want to put like for me, I would put like PNC savings, Barclays savings, whatever it is. If you're pulling from your 401k, put that amount in there. But assets, you need to show that you have liquid assets to purchase the home. There's a reason why we use this form in the greater Philadelphia market. If you're one of my New Jersey clients, first of all, you're on the wrong web, or you're on the wrong video. But second, you don't use this form. Even if you're looking out in like Lehigh Valley area, often they don't use this form. And it's good to show that you have a little cushion too. So if you're on the other end of that spectrum where you have more than what you're saying, put a little bit more there. It can make you look like a stronger buyer. Liabilities. If you have anything that's a liability, this isn't your gym membership you can't get out of. This is, you have your student loan payment, you have your car payment, whatever it is. All right. If you have any current real estate, you would put that there. Especially if that's important if you are selling your house contingent, or if you're buying contingent upon selling your house. Employment information, go back 2 years. And make sure that's filled out correctly, and then combine the income here for both buyer 1 and 2. If there's any additional information that's needed, we can put it in there, just to give the seller some confidence in your buying ability. Okay. Here we go. Wiring fraud. Wiring fraud is so big. You want to make sure that you're verifying the wire instructions. Okay, read this form, take note of it. It's very important. If you suspect that someone interfered with your wire, we got to call the FBI right away and get them involved in it, because the more time that goes by, the least likely we are to recover it. And unfortunately, this is your own risk if you're doing a wire. If you are waiving property inspections, as so many people are, in order to compete in this market, you would just be signing this saying that you understand you weren't advised to waive it, but you're waiving it. If we're doing a price escalation clause, this is saying that you're willing to increase your purchase price by $2,000 or whatever the amount is, higher than a competing offer, up to X. And then if someone else has an escalation clause and theirs goes higher, they kind of won the battle. And then we have to say, well, how are we coming up with that money? Is it just the loan to value ratios increasing? Are you paying for any of that in cash to give kind of an appraisal gap contingency? That would make it a lot stronger. All right. Then we have the ABA. This is affiliated business arrangement. It just has to be disclosed that EXP, since they're my broker, that they have a relationship with Success Lending. Okay. Then you're going to sign some sort of cost estimate. It'll look like this. And you'll see down here, estimated cash needed to purchase $119,000. That's the number of total cash needs to purchase. Down here is what you would need at the table. And then you have your monthly amount, the $32.72 on this example. You then have your seller property disclosure. This is going to be filled out as long as the people live there. So if it's an estate, if it's in trust, they may not have lived at the property and they may not have a lot of information in there. They're supposed to fill it out to their best ability, but sometimes their best ability is none. If the house was done if it was made before 1978, they need to provide a residential lead-based paint disclosure. And that needs to say that they have records or they don't have records of lead-based paint. If you are doing an FHA loan, I'll have you sign this for your protection. Get a home inspection so that you can be an informed buyer, as this is a required form. Okay. And then if it is built before 1978, I'll send over this and you can read about it, about lead safe certs and how to handle it for lead-based paint in the home. All right. So that's about it for all of our paperworks on the buy side. I hope that was helpful and not too boring. Sorry, it can be a little dry contract work, but I hope you have an understanding and you can kind of see more about how it happens when you go under contract or what's expected for you to sign when you're making an offer. Thank you for tuning in.